stop watching the front lines in Ukraine. Because the biggest border change of the 21st century isn't happening there. No tanks, no missiles, no explosions. It's happening quietly, inside Russia itself. For 3 years, the world has asked one question. Is China helping Russia? Today, we finally have the answer. China isn't helping Russia. China is consuming it. This is not an alliance anymore. This is not a partnership. This is a hostile takeover disguised as friendship. While Vladimir Putin burns Russia's economy to seize a few shattered villages in eastern Ukraine, Beijing has been executing something far more ambitious: the slow, methodical absorption of a nuclear superpower. Not influence, not leverage, ownership. Look at the battlefield. Russia's war machine now runs on Chinese components: microchips, optics, drones, machine tools, the very technologies Russia can no longer import from the West. Every sanctioned part that once came from Europe now comes from China, at Chinese prices, on Chinese terms. Moscow doesn't negotiate, it complies. Look at the economy. Russian oil no longer flows west, it flows east, at a discount. Gas once sold to Germany at premium prices is now sold to China for pennies on the dollar. China dictates the contracts. China sets the timelines. China controls the valves. Russia didn't find a new partner. It found a single buyer. And single buyers don't bargain with equals. Look at finance. Russia was cut off from the dollar system. China stepped in. Not with charity, but with the yuan. Trade is now settled in Chinese currency. Russian banks are plugged into Chinese systems. Russian financial sovereignty is evaporating, transaction by transaction. This is what dependency looks like. Now look north, to Siberia. Vast, resource-rich, underpopulated. Chinese companies are leasing land, logging forests, mining minerals, building infrastructure that points south, not west. Roads, railways, pipelines. Not to Moscow, to Beijing. Demographics tell the same story. On one side of the border, millions of Chinese citizens. On the other, empty Russian towns. No invasion required, no flags raised, just gravity. Now look to space. Russia once rivaled the United States. Now its space program depends on Chinese launches, Chinese funding, Chinese cooperation. Even in orbit, Moscow is no longer senior partner. And finally, look at power. China does not support Russia's war. It tolerates it. Because a weakened Russia is useful. An isolated Russia is profitable. A desperate Russia is manageable. This isn't friendship, it's strategy. Beijing didn't rush. It didn't threaten, it waited. And while Putin gambled everything on Ukraine, China quietly rewrote the balance of power across Eurasia. Russia is not pivoting east. Russia is dissolving into China, a junior partner, a resource appendage, a geopolitical buffer state with nuclear weapons, a country that still looks sovereign, but no longer decides its own future. This is the real border shift of our time. And when history looks back, it won't remember the moment it happened. Because it didn't happen with an explosion. It happened with contracts, with loans, with pipelines. Welcome to the new North Korea of the North. Putin tells Russians that China is a brother, standing shoulder to shoulder against the West. But real brothers don't empty your pockets while your house is on fire. Leaked customs data analyzed by the Moscow Times reveals a brutal truth. China has turned Russia's war into a monopoly business. Microchips, machine tools, drone components, tank electronics, the lifeblood of modern warfare. China now controls nearly all of it, and they know Moscow has nowhere else to go. So what did Beijing do? They raised prices by 300, 400, sometimes 500%. This isn't inflation. This isn't supply and demand. This is extortion. Every oil dollar Russia earns flows straight into Chinese factories, paying triple for screws, circuits, and second-rate components. China is financing its own industrial rise by bleeding Russia dry. The longer the war continues, the richer China becomes. While Russian pensioners count coins for bread, space was sacred to Russia. Yuri Gagarin wasn't just an astronaut. He was a national saint. Russia built the ISS. They launched American astronauts. They owned the stars. Not anymore. Western sanctions shattered Russia's space industry. And today, Russia can't even manufacture its own modern guidance chips. So who stepped in? China, but not as an equal. In the International Lunar Research Station, China leads. China designs. China funds. China supplies. Russia has been demoted to a subcontractor, contributing outdated engines and geography. Leaked reports suggest 90% of Russian space electronics now come from China, and not even the good ones. China keeps its military-grade technology. Russia gets commercial leftovers. The result? Russian satellites fail sooner. Navigation accuracy drops. Entire missions collapse. While China lands rovers on the dark side of the moon, Russia watches its legacy get sold for scrap. When Western tech companies fled Russia, the country's digital nervous system was exposed. And China filled the vacuum. Huawei, ZTE. Today, Russia's 5G towers, surveillance cameras, data centers, even parts of its military communications, run on Chinese hardware. This is what intelligence experts call a kill switch dependency. If Beijing wanted, it could cripple Russia's internet, banking system, or communications with a software update. Putin thinks he built a sovereign internet. In reality, he built a vassal network. Russia didn't kick out the NSA. It invited in China's Ministry of State Security. Now look at the streets. Visa-free Chinese tourism is flooding Russia's Far East. But locals aren't celebrating. They're scared. Because these tourists don't act like guests. They act like owners. They use Chinese names for Russian cities. They shop only in Chinese businesses. They keep money inside closed Chinese economic loops. Local Russians feel like extras in their own towns. The psychological border has already fallen. The physical one is just paperwork. This is where it gets existential. On one side of the border, a shrinking, aging Russian population. On the other, overcrowded Chinese industrial regions hungry for land, water, and resources. China doesn't need to annex Siberia. Why change borders when you can control everything without firing a shot? Chinese companies lease land, pay local officials, dominate towns. Mandarin becomes the working language. Local police look away. Moscow becomes irrelevant. The Russian flag still flies, but it's just decoration. China is draining Russia literally. Water from Lake Baikal. Farmland poisoned by aggressive chemicals. Food shipped east. Soil left dead. In the Arctic, Russia's dream projects collapse under sanctions. China doesn't save them. China scavenges them. Demanding discounts. Demanding ownership. Mapping the seabed for future submarines. Russia went from Arctic king to toll collector on a Chinese highway. The most valuable resource China is extracting isn't gas or gold, it's people. Russian scientists, weapons designers, engineers. China offers safety, money, and modern labs. Russia can't compete. Once these minds leave, they never return. China isn't buying weapons. It's buying the minds that create them. But this brain drain isn't random. It isn't accidental. It is strategic. China isn't just offering Russian scientists better salaries. It's offering them something Moscow no longer can: a future. In today's Russia, a top physicist earns less than a mid-level Chinese engineer. Research budgets are collapsing. Laboratories are freezing, literally and financially. And the most talented minds live under constant fear of military mobilization, surveillance, or political pressure. China understands this psychology perfectly. So Chinese recruiters don't just advertise jobs. They run extraction operations, quiet visits, private meetings at academic conferences, encrypted messages sent through intermediaries. The pitch is always the same. Come work where your ideas will be funded, not buried. This isn't a general migration. China is targeting specific Russian strengths: hypersonic physics, aerospace propulsion, submarine acoustics, radar systems, nuclear materials, cryogenic engineering. These are not civilian skills. These are the pillars of Russia's military power. Entire research teams, not individuals, are being relocated. Some labs wake up to discover half their senior staff has vanished. No press release, no farewell, just empty offices and unplugged machines. Here's the part most people miss. When Russia loses oil revenue, it can recover. When it loses territory, borders can be renegotiated. But when a country loses its scientific class, the damage is permanent. You can rebuild a factory in 5 years. You can't rebuild a school of thought in a generation. These scientists aren't being hired as consultants. They're being absorbed into China's research ecosystem, training Chinese students, filing patents under Chinese institutions, embedding Russian expertise into Chinese doctrine. Their knowledge becomes Chinese intellectual property. Even if Russia somehow stabilizes in 10 or 20 years, these people won't come back. Their children will speak Mandarin. Their careers will be Chinese. Their discoveries will carry Chinese flags. Inside Russia, the effects are already visible. Research papers are declining. Patent registrations are collapsing. Advanced weapons programs face quiet delays. Not because of sanctions, but because the people who understood the math are gone. Factories still exist. Design bureaus still have names. But the brains that made them world-class are missing. Russia is becoming a country that copies its own past instead of inventing its future. From Beijing's perspective, this is the deal of the century. Why steal technology when you can recruit the people who invented it? Why reverse engineer weapons when you can hire the engineers who designed them? Every Russian scientist who leaves saves China decades of research and billions in funding. This isn't talent acquisition, it's technological inheritance. China is skipping entire development stages by absorbing Russian expertise directly into its system. This has global consequences. Chinese weapon systems will quietly improve. Faster, quieter, more precise. Not because China suddenly innovated, but because Russia's innovation now wears a Chinese badge. Western intelligence agencies are watching this closely. Not with panic, but with concern. Because the old equation assumed Russia and China were separate military competitors. That assumption is dying. Once this brain drain reaches a critical mass, Russia's fate is sealed. Without scientists, Russia cannot develop next-generation weapons, maintain technological parity, compete in AI, space, or advanced materials, even maintain complex infrastructure without foreign help. At that point, Russia becomes technologically dependent, not just economically dependent, a country that must import its own future. And when your future is imported, it can be priced, restricted, or turned off. This raises an uncomfortable truth. China doesn't need Russia to collapse. It just needs Russia to stop thinking for itself. A state that still has missiles but no mines is not a superpower. It's a warehouse. Empires don't always fall with explosions. Sometimes they dissolve quietly, one scientist at a time. No headlines, no speeches, no flags lowered, just empty labs, silent universities, and a future designed somewhere else. Russia's greatest export is no longer oil, gas, or weapons. It's its intelligence. And once that resource is gone, there is no replacement. No pipeline can carry it back. No treaty can recover it. This is the final stage of absorption, when a country no longer belongs to itself. Russia's infrastructure now points south. Its pipelines, rails, and supply chains are welded to China. Even a future Russian leader couldn't reverse this. The concrete has set. The pipes are buried. The chains are forged. This is the tragedy. Russia fought every invasion in its history. But this one arrived disguised as salvation. So here's the real question. Has Russia already passed the point of no return? When the war in Ukraine ends, will there even be a Russia left to negotiate with? Or will the West be negotiating with Beijing instead? The map of the 21st century is changing. And in that map, Russia isn't rising. It's fading. This is Mr. Warlog. We read the fine print empires try to hide. Watch the East, because that's where the sun is rising and where the Russian bear is setting. Stay safe.